Well, hey, all you wiretappers out there. Back here in studio Gangland Wire, Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective and now podcaster and former filmmaker and author. I mean, I've just done it all here in my retirement. I'm just kidding. I don't take myself that seriously. I want to tell you a kind of a short story today about the manager of the Ravenite Social Club, Norman DuPont. I recently was looking at some video and I snagged some video to put up YouTube shorts of people going in and out of the Ravenite. And so I didn't know who this one guy was. So I threw it out, to the fans on YouTube and they said, "Oh, that's Norman DuPont." And what you could tell, he was like a guy running errands. He was running in and out, opening the door, going next door and getting supplies and bringing them back to the little corner store there and then bringing them back to the club. So Norman DuPont, and I thought, well, who is this guy? I started researching him. You can't find out a whole lot about him. It's kind of an interesting story later in his life. One of the first things I found out about him was it's kind of crazy. In 1990, this is not too long before he committed the crime that sent him away for a long time. He was working at the Feast of San Gennaro down in Little Italy in Mulberry and Spring Street. And there was a child of an off-duty New York City police officer named Anthony Penzone, and she complained that a concession game was not working properly, and a couple of off-duty cops went over to the booth and started making a complaint, and the booth attendant called out. Also, some other guys showed up, and some other off-duty cops were in the area, showed up, and they have a big brawl, and the cops ended up getting the worst end of it. These guys beat them with like sticks and iron bars or something, and went to the hospital, were treated and released. One of them was kept for a while. He had a fractured skull. So one of the persons arrested was the Ravenite manager, Norman DuPont. They charged him with second-degree assault. It's just like crazy, crazy, crazy. Now, he was manager at the Ravenite. The Ravenite was an Italian-American heritage club, which is, we all know, was the headquarters of Gotti, after he ascended to the throne, if you will. It's at 247 Mulberry Street. It was used as a mob hangout and became a storefront later on, became a shoe store and a men's clothing store most recently. But what's the history of it? And this thing goes clear back to 1926. It was the Alto Knights Social Club, which was an old street gang during Prohibition, used it, and that's what they called themselves, the Alto Knights. And it was a hangout for Lucky Luciano and others of that Prohibition area mafia. This name was taken from the Order of St. James of Alto Passio. 1957, Carlo Gambino took over the family and became named the Gambino family, as we know now. He renamed the club the Ravenite in honor of his favorite poem. Now, who would have thought that Carlo Gambino would have a favorite poem? Go figure that one. He liked Edgar Allan Poe, and of course, The Raven was his favorite poem. And so we call it the Ravenite. Now, he hung out there and he was the boss there, and people would come and see him there. But eventually, Carlo Gambino was a guy, he was careful. He was always careful. And he quit going down there when he discovered the cops had a big interest in surveillance of that club and the FBI. By this time, if you've listened to my podcast with Gary Clemente telling about his father, Peter Clemente, Peter Clemente was one of the first guys in the top hoodlum squad, one of the first Italian guys in the top hoodlum squad, and Gambino was his guy, so he was probably down there watching Gambino himself. So Gambino, he leaves that. He understands now. He didn't pass that. Gotti didn't learn that lesson from him, as we know. The management of the club then and the head duck of the club then goes to Anello Della Croce. Of course, he's the underboss for Gambino, and he uses it until he dies. And Gotti will come in and take it over as his club, leave the Bergen Fish and Hunt Club, and after he, does away with Paul Castellano. The club it's a constant battle between the FBI and the mafia to get bugs and wiretaps in places. Now you can always tap a phone out on the pole, but you need to get a bug inside because people are really careful, and then eventually they'll become even more careful about talking inside anywhere, and they do the walk and talks. But the FBI, if you watch this most recent Get Gotti on Netflix, I think it's in the second episode, they tell about all the ways they tried to get bugs into the Ravenite. It was hard. They got a key bait so they could go in and out at will, and it seemed like nobody was paying any attention to it. They were going in and out, and they kept putting in bugs, and nothing was working. Nothing was working. And even when they did kind of work, they weren't getting anything because as they find out Eventually, they find out that Gotti was going out the back door of the club, up some inside stairs into another apartment building, some elderly Italian lady, giving her a little bit of money, and she'd leave, and he'd have his meetings up there. They got the bug up there, and the rest is history. Really brought them down. That wiretap or that bug up there really brought them down. Surveillance of it kind of helped the FBI when Gotti made everybody come in on Wednesdays, I believe. He also, another thing that's not known is labor union guys who were connected to the Gambinos or wanted something from Gotti, was doing business with Gotti, was doing business with the mob. They would show up a lot and do those walk and talks out front. So it helped the FBI determine who the labor union people that were corrupt. Melvin DuPont, he wanted to be a gangster so bad, I guess, because he eventually will make his bones. Now he's involved with this fight, but that ain't a deal. There was a guy named Joy Fabosi who had a car service company there in Manhattan, and he owed money to Melvin DuPont, or Melvin DuPont had verified him, had vouched for him or something. The guy wasn't paying. DuPont, I believe he got drunk. He goes to the car service, and there's a dispatcher there named Harmon Fuchs, and DuPont shoots and kills him just as a message to his boss. There's a couple of low-rent scumbags, Tony Nose Percietti and Guy Zapula, who are either with him or know about this, and they end up testifying against him, and he gets like 25 to life or something. Now, while he's in prison, he has a teenage son who is drowned in an upstate boating accident there in New York, and the prison people the management will not let him go out and go to the funeral, but he does get an agreement with his family that they'll bury the kid. They bring the kid down into West Virginia, so at least he'll be buried close to his father's in Glenville, West Virginia, the Gilmer Federal Prison. That's kind of an interesting story, and another thing about these social clubs, I know, they had several managers, and we look at our social club here in Kansas City. They're always a target of the FBI and the intelligence people, and they're really careful in and around them. But here we had one called The Trap. Everybody just called it The Trap. It really was a Northview Social Club. They even used to have a sign out front back when I was young. They had a sign out front. And, I'd see these guys hang around out front. They'd be inside. They'd be playing cards. They had the espresso machine and the whole 9 yards. And they'd have games going on, Texas Hold'em and play gin and different kinds of gambling games. There's always gambling on it, of course. And in the back room, there was a smaller room. That's where they'd have the bigger games. And that's where these guys would bring some big fat fish that they could fleece. Some of these business guys, they'd want to, have the cachet of playing cards with the mob. So they'd bring them into the back room and of course, fleece. They'd pay for that little trip into the back room of the Trap or the Northview Social Club. We always had a manager here too. Back when I first went in the unit, it was a guy named Turk Harris. He was Italian. I don't know if his father was not Italian or whatever. His last name was Harris, but he was Italian. He used to tell everybody he was like the head of the mafia in Kansas City, and he lived up above it. So it was really hard to get into that thing. Anyhow, you could get it done, but it was hard to do. I know an FBI agent who was in the basement running some wire one night about 4:00 in the morning. And as he started out, there was some mob guy had been up in one of these upstairs apartments visiting a girl, and he was walking out the same time the FBI agent was walking out. FBI agent just happened to hear him coming out the front door as he started to open the front door of the trap, and he pulls the front door shut and just looks out the window and sees this Willie Comisano Jr. walking out and getting in his car driving away. And then Bobby Maroon took it over after Turk Harris. I never knew what happened to Turk Harris. I don't think he died. I don't know. He was kind of a loudmouth. I think people didn't like him in the end. And a guy named Bobby Maroon took it over. He'd been, a joint, had a West 12th Street bar, kind of a B-girl bar, and he'd had that for quite a while. And they trusted him, and he helped run the gambling games there. He actually ended up starting another game down the street, upstairs above a pharmacy. But he ran it until I think it finally closed down. Bobby Maroon got old and died. Everybody started going to prison there in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, and it just closed down. It's still sitting there today, vacant. I know a guy that went in there and tried to buy it. They wanted like $100,000 for this just like run down old storefront. It actually had a little restaurant adjoining it, but they wanted $100,000 for it. And this guy wanted to turn it into an Italian restaurant, and it's down in our Little Italy. So I don't know. That's somebody ought to do that with the Ravenite, get hold of it and turn it into a little bar and restaurant. I think it would go, just the cachet of being able to go into the old Ravenite. But anyhow, so that's the story of Norman DuPont and the Ravenite Social Club. Thanks a lot, guys. And don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles. So watch out for motorcycles when you're out there. If you have a problem with PTSD, go to the VA website and get that hotline number. And along with PTSD is drugs and alcohol. You got that problem. You don't have to be in don't have to be a veteran. You can go see Anthony Ruggiano. He's a drug and alcohol counselor down in Florida, and he has a hotline on his website or his YouTube page or something. I don't know. He's got one anyhow. And don't forget to like and subscribe and tell your friends about us. And, hey, I got books and movies out there, and got movies to rent. My documentaries you can rent, and I got a book for sale in Amazon. I'm working on a couple other books. I think I'm going to start trying to take several podcasts and then make a short book of several chapters, and each chapter will be whatever the podcast was that I did a particular week. What I've got so far is a bunch of Chicago stories, and so I'm working on that, and I'll do some New York stories, and I'll do some Midwest stories. I may do one with just Kansas City stories and some of my own experiences. I'm going to start putting out a few short books, as if I don't have enough to do. But anyhow, so thanks a lot, guys, and keep coming back. Keep coming back.